Hello everyone and welcome to this final part of making dice. Here are the dice from our previous videos. We cast them and now we want to make some dice of them, so we need to do some finishing works. This includes removing the sprues, clean up the surfaces and get some paint on them. So I just want a quick rush a little bit about the tools that you might need. One of the most important tools for me are knives, so like these X-Acto knives, or what I really like are scalpels. So you have these changeable blades on top. You have also all kinds of shapes on blades. I got several of them. Regarding to the project you're working on, it's super handy, and I really like to have a good heft when I work with a sharp knife. So that's one part. The other part will be sandpapers. I got a bunch of stuff here, starting with some easy, cheap and rough sandpaper. This is 80 grit, and this is for removing of a lot of material. We will see later what we're going to use this. For a bit of detail work, I'd like to use these wet and dry sandpapers. You see I already made some smaller pieces here. I already used some of these. They come in this big bundle package, and they start at 400 grit and go up to 3000 grit. I bought them online. This wasn't something I found in my local shops. They ended up all at 1200 or maybe less than that, so I decided to go online and pick up these. You have a variety of different grids, so you can slowly work your way through the different grids and get a better surface finish. So that's for our finishing step. You also might need a saw, especially in this case. You see I left this sprue on and I let them cure for a full week. So in this case I didn't remove it right after I removed the dye from the mold. Sometimes when the material is still a little bit soft, you can cut something like that off with a knife or with a good clipper. In this case I didn't do that, so you can just use a saw and trim this off. And after we finished our surfaces, we need some paint to finish the dye completely. I use acrylic paints and I refilled them in these little needle bottles here. Regular, they come in containers like this. But I think it's a little bit unhandy to work all the time with these, and I don't want to spread a lot of paint and work from that and have leftovers. So I just refilled them in the little bottles here, so I don't have to open and close it all the time, and make sure I keep my material in good conditions. Also, I checked the safety data sheet to make sure that this material is allowed to work on toys. And yeah, one way to apply it is directly from the needle, or you can spread it a little bit by your gloves, or what I also find handy are some Q-tips to work from. And for the final cleanup, I used some denatured alcohol. I also refilled it in this little spray pump bottle here. Makes working a little bit easier. Here are the dice. I let them sit for at least a week to make sure they are fully hardened. Yeah, I will trim this off with a saw and I'll be back in a moment. And here we have our two pieces. So this can be set aside and we can start working on these. I think we start with this one. Always be careful when you work with a really sharp knife. Make sure you're comfortable with that. Maybe you need to try some stuff. Also, this is a very hard and tough material, so make sure you don't start working on something and it broke off and you run the blade into yourself. So yeah, we have this little bit of material proud of here. I start to work with a knife, and in this case I just start to remove little chips. If you work in little chips, it's no problem, the material is soft and works great. If you start to remove bigger chips, the material tends to break like glass, and that's always a problem. Now nearly flush with the surface. Hopefully you can see it here. There's still a little edge that's coming from where the two parts of our mold meet. And I carefully scrape along these sections just to remove it. So you always need to check with your thumb if there's any stuff left. And also a trick I can show you, it's a draw knife. So this in particular is not a draw knife, but you can use it as a draw knife. If you're working with plastics, you can use your plate perpendicular to the surface and scrape along. This might need to practice a little bit, but you need to make sure gently to scrape over it and thereby remove little chips. So, and now we have a soft, nice edge. So let's see if you can see it. It's a little bit rougher now, but it's smooth. Now our edges are smooth and cleaned off. There are no edges or steps or something like that left. So the rough part is done on this. Let's take this one. You see there's a little bit more material to move. So maybe I need a little bit of a bigger plate. So you see this is a very sturdy plate. It has this holder here in the back, so there's not that much free plate length. So I change and we test this one here. And now we do the same. We start to remove chips. You just need to check how big you can go and always have in mind that you want to meet the surfaces down. So I always take one surface as a reference, make my plate parallel, and then start to shave it down. Just before I'm on the surface, when I have a little bit left, I stop and go to the next surface. So I just go all around it, and then I start to do the fine cut. So this looks a bit more like the tip we want. And now we start the fine cut. So now we can switch back to our knife here and start to work on that. The surfaces are roughed in. And now I start to form the rounded edges by slightly scraping over it, taking small chips and rotate the die to follow the curve. You also need to check from the side that you not remove too much. So if you remove too much here, when you cut down the straight parts, you will have a smaller tip point here, and that's not good if you want to have a proper die to roll. So last but not least, we trim off the tip. You see the others are pretty round and this one is still a bit pointy. I cut off something and then I start to use the draw knife technique and just scrape over it to round it down. So these two are done so far. For the next part, we will switch over to the rough sanding paper, because that is a lot of surface area here. If you want to take chips off, it's no problem at the edges here, where the material is a little bit thinner. So here you can roughly take off a little bit of material, but it's already hard to draw the knife through such a lot of material here. So yeah, you could start to shave this down as well, but in this case I think we are good to go with the rough sanding paper. So I like to put it flat down, use my left hand to hold it in place and my right hand perpendicular to the surface, and then I start to scrape off. In between, you always need to check that you are perpendicular to the surface. You want to have a smooth and flat surface. If you remove too much material on one side, you can't put it on back, so your die is lost. So make sure to check every few passes that you are still holding it parallel and the way you need to hold it. On this side we are really low. On this side there's a little bit more. So now I try to put a little bit more of pressure on this part here to remove that. Now our surface is complete, so we are good to go. We don't have any dents in here because we filled into less of the material. On this side I'm nearly there. A little bit over here. I just do some slight passes to correct the angle. And now by scraping over the surface here, I just feel there's a slightly edge, and that's okay. That's the point you want to stop. You can also see here your radius is still there, so your shape is complete, because now we want to refine this. So we take this aside and we go to 400. That's a huge step. I know some people are more for smaller increases of grain, but this is only plastic, so you can now work with 400 grit without any problems. So now we are good to go. This is now, you see, it becomes a little bit finer and it's not that wide anymore. So from 400 I jump up to 800 or maybe 1000. Let's see what I got here. This is some 1000 grit sandpaper. And we start the same way. This now just takes a few passes because we are at the point we want to smooth our surface and don't want to remove material that much. So I just make sure that I got a nice and clean surface finish and that I can move on to the next grid. Now we need some water. You just need a little bit of that. I think we can go up to 2000 now. So in this case I just take a small piece. I wetten it a little bit. You just need, you see, a little bit of water on the surface. And now I gently start to smooth out the surface. now we can start to see the other side. So it's still a little bit satin, but we start to see the number on the other side. So we are nearly there. The last thing is 3000 grit. I got this used piece here, so it's always good to keep some of the more used pieces. They are a little bit dull, so maybe this act like 4 or 5000 grit. We also wetten this, and this is something I try to buff up the surface a little bit with. And it's starting to become clear, you see. Surface finish here. This is still a little bit shinier than that. Yeah, so that's so far on this one. Next thing would be using something to polish this up. Now we do the same thing on the other two. Because we already used the knife on them, we can start like with 1000 grit or 1200 grit. I also like to use some blocks. This is just a waste piece of wood, some double-sided tape to glue on a little piece of 1200 grit, and I wetten it again. And now we do practically the same on these. I want to make sure just to hit the parts that were worked over slightly to bring them in shape. We also need to check for our cut line here. I really need to find it here. Here's a little bit. I hope I can make it here. You can see it. This tiny gap here. So to rough that out, you just take a few passes. You also want to blend in a little bit. So I roughly go over the surfaces to make sure that I not only work on the parts that I cut, so also a little bit on the stuff around. So if you don't want to polish it up, you could also on this one go and use the 3000 grit sandpaper on all the surfaces here to make everything in the same look. And now we start to polish this up as well. They are done. So now you can use a paper towel, clean them off a little bit and dry them. And the next step is painting. So before I start with painting, we need to make sure to wash these. So just take them under some water, some dish soap. You can also use a little bit of alcohol just to remove some grease on the surfaces, and you're good to go. So I'll clean them, fix off, and come back and we start painting them. I quickly cleaned everything up. I washed off the dice. You just need to make sure that you don't have any dust left in all your numbers. And you can see here, surface is now a little bit dull and not as shiny as before. But there's an even look to everything, and I think that's quite good. So, for example, we start with this one. And yeah, I think with this paint, with this color here, a yellow would be great. But why don't we go a little bit nuts and use this bright green here? So put it over. I sit directly here at the end of the line and then gently bring in some material. want to make sure you hit everything, so I scrape around the bottom and make sure I hit everything. So this is a little bit too much. Now we take our Q-tip and slightly remove the leftover material, just a little bit. Don't want to remove it out of the crevices. So I'll do that for the rest of the set, and then I'll let it dry for about an hour, and then we remove this ugly rests here. So I use these little stands here so I can put it down without touching anything and let them dry. And yeah, let's do it with the rest. For something like this, I will show you a little different technique. So what you can also do, spreading a lot of material, and then you use your gloves, shove it around the complete surface. We have a thin layer everywhere and our numbers are great. You can already see here are some bubbles. I think that's one of the cut lines. It's always a tricky little part. And you see here's a little bit of material missing and it's gone. So just a final quick check on some of the spots and we are good to go. And we'll do the same on this one here. So we let them dry, and yeah, just for your information, this is just one way to do this. So you can also use a fine brush and brush in your paint. I know there are some gel pens and some things like Sharpies and stuff that you can also use on these. That's totally good for engravings like this, so feel free to use another method. This is just the way I did it, and especially when you take a look at the kind of dice that I do. I have a lot of surface to fill, and I once did one of these set with a silver Sharpie, and it was so awful to fill everything in. It took so long. So the method of spreading all around the die and removing the leftover is much easier and much more even in the surface finish. And the paint should be dry enough now. So I take a piece of paper towel. I folded it a few times to make it a little bit stiffer. I'll take this. You can use whatever suits you. Here I got some denatured alcohol. Just a few sprinkles on that, and then I bow it a little bit so I have a really tough and stiff surface. And then we just carefully wipe over the surface, not too much. You just want to remove what's beside all your numbers and not the numbers themselves. It's also, this needs a little longer to fully dry, and you want to get the part where it's just dry enough to work with, but not too dry that you can't remove the rest of the paint. So, and here's our last phase, and you see this goes quite easy. So here we have a lot of paint. Now I swipe over to this part, just one or two sprays, and then carefully removing any leftover shadows, because if you use this section here. It's like a really thin version of the paint, and you smear it all over the surface. So I just wipe along with a clean section to get all this little thin layering here. Make sure you get all the edges and stuff. And that's it for this one. And now onto the rest. Okay, let's take a look at the result. So far we start with the worst things here. We have a lot of bubbles in here, and that's just from me. I got pretty lazy using a vacuum chamber and a pressure pot, so I lost a lot of my skill working with epoxy without these tools. So I got some small bubbles here at the surface. I'm not really sure where they come from. This is pretty straight line, so maybe this is the section where the mold was cut. I'm not sure what happened here. So that's something you need to practice. Believe me, it will take a few tries, but if I got back into this, I would get better results with just some learning to get used to my materials back. But I also have some really good news, and that's this one here. You can see everything is fine. All the numbers are crisp and clear. There are just some bubbles under the surface. I hardly can catch them on the camera. I think one is here. Oh no, that's just some dust. So this one came out really great. These ones are optically not perfect, but they are suitable to use. All these little bubbles are on one side very small, on the other side near the surface. So you can treat them like if they were part of the design and were part of the engraving. So the impact of these bubbles in the rolling behavior is not very huge. Problematic are if you have huge bubbles that take out a lot of material and that is off center. So if you have like a whole corner that is missing, this is the worst you can have. So make sure small bubbles are not a problem. They are just more an optical feature. But these dies are suitable to use. Also, this face here, I leave it blank. But if you want, you can, of course, do something to it. Some people add little stickers to this and clear coat them. Some people take the font and try to engrave it. In this case, the one is missing and it's just a straight line. So you just need to add a straight line here and have your die fully and complete. And if you're really skilled in engraving, you can try to engrave your own little logo or a little symbol in that page, and you're good to go. So that's so far from these dies. The next part will be working on a little tutorial series using the pressure pot and the vacuum chamber. I will show you the difference. I will show you how to use them and what is the big advantage of using them. Mostly we're doing the same steps, so I will quickly go through the steps to set up the molds, but the casting using the stuff, using the tools will be much easier. So you see, you save a lot of time and get better results. But that's mostly the reason using good tools. If you have a good tool that will help you to increase the amount of stuff you can do and increase the quality level. So using good tools is not the reason to make something better. It's mostly the reason to make something better and faster. So you can use a handsaw and you can cut your wood with that and you can build up nice furniture. But if you have some proper tools to help you out, like a table saw, it will improve your process. It will make it faster. You will get better results in perpendicular cuts and stuff. So it's always the same. It's not impossible to make good stuff without these expensive tools, but they help a lot. So I will talk a little bit about the tools, how they were used, etc. and this maybe gives you an opinion if you want to join in that or not. Working on these a little bit more makes even better dies in that way, so that's fine to do. And yeah, the next video I will do will be a little bit different. I will not start with the next tutorial series. The next part will be a little bit about a project, and I give you a slightly sneak peek over here. It has to do with these little printed guys over there. I also ordered a new camera, so hopefully the next videos will have a little bit better quality. I also check on some other software to work with and try to find a way to get a little bit better in this. But that's so far from me today, and I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, leave me a comment down below, and I hope to see you in the next video. Until that, happy dice making.